saying that the SEC is telling him to delist all these other cryptocurrencies except Bitcoin. And he was as quoted as saying that would essentially mean the end of the crypto industry in the US. So, what's your response to Brian Armstrong?
There's always been a few schools in Bitcoin, right? And Brian Armstrong would fall into the category of, let's say, Silicon Valley startup who sees Bitcoin as a means to an end, and that is to do some venture capital, to go public, to make a lot of money. And so he never really said anything that would stand out as being particularly appreciative of Bitcoin as the perfect money, beautiful architecture that it is. We had during the fork wars of 2017, you had the New York agreement, and you had, oh man, I think it was up to 20 companies really that showed their hand that they were looking to control Bitcoin purely for commercial purposes to better their financing needs and to just go down the typical path of a Silicon Valley startup and showed no appreciation for the protocol and the underlying aesthetic at all. In my case, I had the experience back in the 1990s of actually, I have a patent on virtual currencies. I can claim rightfully to be the inventor of virtual currencies. I have the only patent on a virtual currency, virtual market making, and virtual securities that goes back to 1996. And that was born out of my experience on Wall Street in the 1980s. And what attracted me to Wall Street in the 1980s, aside from the obvious remuneration possibilities, was just I loved the mechanics of it and the market making in particular and price discovery. Price discovery is a topic that I can talk endlessly about. And with Bitcoin, it's kind of the end of price discovery because everything will be priced in Bitcoin eventually. Everything goes to zero against Bitcoin. And so for someone like myself who's been following this for 40 years, finance, markets, technology, Bitcoin is the holy grail. It's the end all. I would say that um, my compatriot in all of this would be Michael Saylor, who really, when you hear Michael Saylor talk, he talks about the aesthetics of Bitcoin, the beauty of Bitcoin. And he speaks about it in a way that I think carries the torch from the Max and Stacy from 2011. He started buying it, I guess, when it was 10,000 or 12,000 or so in the 2020 era. So we were there from 2011 to 2020. I think he's kind of carried the torch from 2020 in a lot of ways, and introduced Bitcoin to massive pools of capital. I'm surprised that more companies haven't followed his lead, given the outbreak and inflation that we've had, exactly as he predicted it. The melting ice cube, as he called it at that time, is exactly what happened. And I'm surprised more companies. Although I guess we could say now we are in an era where BlackRock and these other major institutions are now finally looking at Bitcoin. So his work on the institutional level, I guess, is bearing fruit now, 3 years later. And I see in the Middle East, they're starting to recognize Bitcoin. And so that's a huge pool of capital. I think all that oil money, when it finds its way into Bitcoin, will be a huge catalyst for higher prices. It's a natural way for the oil industry to diversify their portfolio and to because Bitcoin essentially is energy, and I think energy eventually gets priced in Bitcoin, and there's a marriage between these two in a big way. So I think that's the kind of the answer. Is I've always been fascinated by price discovery in markets and kind of the architecture of markets and how markets work under the hood. And Bitcoin is just such a it's a pristine, perfect money, and I think it's something that humans have been searching for since forever. And now we're seeing it change society on really a fundamental level with the introduction of Bitcoin. It's a lot of people are freaking out because of it because it destroys the status quo, and a lot of people who were kind of waiting for it to come along, who had the faith, that humanity could be saved. They see Bitcoin in those terms. So you have this split going on, which is very exciting. I think the people who were into it earlier and walked away just never got it from the beginning. So, like, let's say a Roger Ver, for example, who was early, came in at about the same time as we did. I don't think he ever really got it on that level. He just kind of saw it as a means to an end and did other projects. And I think that's true for a lot of people. There's very few, there are a few that really have been in it for this long and kind of see it in those terms. And every day there's more coming in. So, certainly with El Salvador, we've had a chance to, and we've been on the ground for almost 2 years. The president is completely on board. He was tweeting about Bitcoin years ago, um, and he completely gets it. And so it's having a huge impact on El Salvador.
Max, you've been here since a dollar. Um, I can assume that maybe you don't need to do this for financial reasons, but you and Stacy are in El Salvador pushing adoption. Why was it so important for you to go there? And why did you want to be a part of the movement where to help them kind of adopt Bitcoin?
Going to be the case that like a country would make Bitcoin legal tender. I remember we had Tour de Meester on Keiser Report 5 or 6 years ago, and we were debating, what country would be the first to make Bitcoin legal tender. And Tour said, well, it's going to be a small country. It's going to be a country looking to escape maybe the dollar hegemony, etc. But El Salvador was not one of the countries we guessed. But the idea is that definitely at some point a country would make Bitcoin legal tender. So El Salvador was that country. And so Max and Stacy went there and we met with the president. And it was obvious that he was completely orange pilled and understood Bitcoin at the deepest level. And so this would be the Bitcoin citadel. This would be a country now is going to be recreated from scratch, because remember, El Salvador had been through 50 years of hell, civil war, and then the gang wars, and the country's being rebuilt really from scratch, and it would be built on Bitcoin as legal tender. So that was couldn't imagine a more exciting project to be a part of. So we moved there, and we've been able to offer our thoughts on some stuff, and make great friends there. And the attitude there is just fantastic. The attitude in El Salvador, because of Bitcoin, Bitcoin is known by 100% of the population. Doesn't you don't actually need to use Bitcoin to be orange pilled, because the mindset of Bitcoin is already you're making a change in your life. And then you have 5, 10, 15, 20% of the population actually using it, and the adoption rate is increasing, etc. But the mindset is 100% part of the daily life. And the optimism that comes with having unconfiscatable wealth that you can aspire to make better in your life, to accumulate property, to have property, unconfiscatable property for you and your family. It has a tremendous impact, and you can feel it wherever you travel throughout the country. There's just an optimism there, and which you don't really have elsewhere. I mean, in the U.S., I think by contrast, the mood seems to be a bit down, a bit of a downer. People are less optimistic, because there just seems to be very not much of a focus on what the country should be doing right now. It seems a bit lost. But you don't find that in El Salvador. El Salvador is very focused, and people are just in a great place.
Yeah.
And this is just permeates throughout life there.